There's no evidence that Canada intends to operate a mixed fleet of submarines. Instead, the government has narrowed its choices to just two contenders, a South Korean design and a joint German-Norwegian design. Both, according to officials, meet the Navy's extremely demanding standards for performance, safety, and long-term reliability. This clarification came directly from Prime Minister Mark Carney during a press stop in New York. Reporters pressed him on the procurement process, and he was unusually direct. Carney confirmed that Canada would not split the order across multiple suppliers. One nation's design will win, and only one. The American option, which in past decades might have been the default, is simply not on the table. That in itself is a remarkable shift. At first glance, this may seem like a dry matter of defense logistics, but in reality, it carries much deeper implications. Carney explained that operating a single class of submarine generates efficiencies across the board. Spare parts can be shared, training pipelines are simplified, and maintenance cycles become predictable. Over decades, these efficiencies save billions in taxpayer dollars. Yet the decision is not just about cost effectiveness. It is also about sovereignty. In the current climate of strained relations with Washington, choosing a non-American option is a quiet but unmistakable statement of independence. The numbers at stake underline the significance. Analysts estimate the contract to be worth between 20 and 24 billion Canadian dollars. The plan is to acquire around 12 conventional submarines, a huge investment for a navy of Canada's size. And Ottawa has made clear that projects of this magnitude must meet new rules. They are not just about buying military hardware. They must also generate lasting benefits at home. That means creating Canadian jobs, fostering industrial partnerships, and ensuring that technological expertise stays within the country long after the submarines are delivered. As a result, the competing bidders have shaped their offers carefully. On one side is Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, offering the Type 212CD. This design has already been ordered by Germany and Norway, giving it credibility and NATO interoperability. Its strength lies in being tried and tested within the alliance framework. The drawback, however, is timing. Because Germany and Norway are first in line, Canada would likely be pushed to the back of the delivery schedule. On the other side is South Korea's Hanwha Ocean, with its KSS-3 submarine. This vessel is larger and incorporates advanced lithium-ion battery technology, allowing for longer underwater endurance. Its advantage is speed of delivery. If the contract is signed next year, the first submarine could be delivered by 2032, with 4 in service by 2035. Korea has also gone further in sweetening its offer. Seoul has hinted at co-investments in Canadian industries ranging from battery manufacturing to liquefied natural gas to aerospace. In other words, South Korea is not just selling submarines, it is offering a broader economic partnership. That detail highlights a bigger theme. Canada is leveraging its defense procurement to achieve wider industrial goals. Suppliers are no longer judged only on technical merit. They are expected to create spillover benefits that strengthen Canada's economy in the long run. To fully understand why Ottawa is taking this approach, we need to look at the broader geopolitical context. Since April 2025, the United States has imposed sweeping tariffs on a wide range of imports, from metals to autos to agricultural products. These duties, ranging from 10 to 50%, were framed by the White House as measures to restore balance and protect American workers. But allies like Canada see them differently, as heavy-handed attempts to force compliance. In the past, Canada might have lobbied for exemptions or carved out special treatment. This time, however, Ottawa has chosen another path. Instead of asking for favors, it has turned procurement itself into a tool of industrial policy. Canada has signed onto a $1.3 trillion European Union initiative designed to strengthen shared supply chains. At home, it has rewritten procurement rules to ensure that Canadian firms benefit first. The effects of this strategy are already visible. What Washington intended as leverage has backfired. Tariffs designed to pull allies closer are instead driving them to diversify. Where once a Canadian submarine contract might have automatically gone to an American defense giant, the field is now dominated by European and Asian competitors. This creates a feedback loop. Every time the United States imposes duties, Canada and other allies look elsewhere for partners. Every time Ottawa awards a major contract to a non-American supplier, that loop tightens. It reduces reliance on United States supply chains and accelerates new partnerships across the Atlantic and the Pacific. The submarine program illustrates this shift in dramatic fashion. A contract that could have reinforced American dominance in defense supply chains has instead become a symbol of diversification. It shows how economic pressure can produce outcomes that are the opposite of what was intended. And it demonstrates how Canada, often overlooked in global strategy, is carving out a more independent course, one where military procurement doubles as a lever for economic growth and geopolitical signaling. Washington isn't just losing out on revenue, it's also losing the quiet influence that comes with submarine maintenance contracts, training programs, and shared technology standards. When Canada buys submarines from somewhere else, it buys into new supply chains, new expertise, and new political ties. But this choice isn't without its risks. Germany's design offers seamless NATO integration, but Canada would have to wait in a crowded delivery queue. South Korea promises faster timelines, but its newest model has never been exported before. Both designs claim the ability to stay submerged for more than 3 weeks, an essential requirement for Arctic patrols. And both rely on next-generation lithium-ion battery systems, a clear departure from traditional propulsion. The final contract, then, will shape more than Canada's Navy. It will decide which global supply chains Canada's economy is tied into for decades to come. Washington will have to live with the signal. Tariffs that were meant to give the United States leverage have instead pushed one of its closest allies to spend billions elsewhere, into Europe and Asia, reshaping industrial and strategic balances. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been unusually blunt about this. He says Canada is repositioning its trade relationships, not just in theory, but in practice. When Donald Trump slapped tariffs on Canadian exports and European goods, he called it leverage. But instead of strengthening United States influence, the move has given Canada and its allies every reason to diversify. That's why Carney is signing a partnership with Germany to develop critical minerals inside Canada. Minerals that Europe needs for its industries and defense. At the same time, Ottawa is preparing one of the largest military procurement programs in its history, the replacement of its aging submarine fleet. Canada currently operates 4 British-built subs, all decades old and, honestly, increasingly difficult to maintain. Ottawa plans to replace them with up to 12 modern vessels, a program valued at tens of billions of dollars. CBC News reports that each new submarine could cost around $2 billion, making this one of Canada's most expensive defense procurements ever. 2 contenders remain in the running. ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems of Germany, with the Type 212 CD, and Hanwha Ocean of South Korea, offering the KSS-3. The German option has the advantage of NATO interoperability, but it comes at a higher cost and slower delivery. The Korean option could deliver boats before 2030, but Canada would be the first international customer. What matters most, though, is who is not competing: the United States. In past decades, Washington might have been the automatic partner. Today, Canada is deliberately channeling billions into Hamburg or Busan instead of U.S. shipyards. And this pivot is no accident. It's happening in response to tariffs. Trump has raised duties on Canadian metals, copper, and softwood lumber to levels as high as 35 to 50%. Ottawa is making it clear that if Washington treats Canada like a trade adversary, it should not expect to be rewarded with major defense contracts. The submarine deal is only one part of this broader pattern. During his August trip through Europe, Prime Minister Carney visited Poland, Germany, and Latvia, bringing trade, energy, and defense to the center of every conversation. In Berlin, he signed a minerals partnership, noting that Canada's 200 active mining projects can provide Europe with resources it desperately needs. In Warsaw, he reaffirmed NATO ties with a partner already spending more than 4% of GDP on defense. And on energy, Carney is advancing a plan to export Canadian LNG through Churchill Port in Manitoba, helping Europe cut dependence on Russian gas while opening new markets outside of the United States. The pattern is unmistakable. Every time Washington raises tariffs, Ottawa builds alternatives. Europe is doing the same. The EU recently secured a tariff ceiling of 15% from the US. But the painful negotiations underscore just how unpredictable Washington has become. Canada isn't waiting for the next shock. By strengthening ties with Europe and Asia now, Ottawa is insulating itself from future turbulence in Washington. The irony is hard to miss. Trump's tariffs were designed to increase U.S. leverage. Instead, they've opened the door for competitors. Germany, South Korea, and others are winning contracts worth tens of billions that once would have gone straight to American companies. Defense spending that should have reinforced Washington's influence is now reinforcing Europe's and Asia's. That doesn't mean Canada is walking away from the U.S. Over 85% of Canadian exports still flow tariff-free under CUSMA. The economic relationship remains massive. But Ottawa is making a statement. Canada has options, and it will use them. The submarines, the minerals partnerships, the LNG deals, all send the same message. Canada will not be cornered. If Washington pushes with tariffs, Ottawa will pivot with strategy. And now, the stakes are about to rise even higher. President Trump has announced that he's ready to impose sanctions on Russia, but only if NATO members agree to a sweeping new tariff plan against China. He is demanding tariffs between 50% and 100% on Chinese imports, and an immediate cutoff of Russian oil. It's a dramatic shift. Just weeks ago, the White House was celebrating tariffs as a tool to restore leverage. Now, Trump is linking them directly to the war in Ukraine, turning trade policy into a bargaining chip for global security. Allies are left shaking their heads. For Canada, the submarine program already proved one lesson. Tariffs meant to tighten Washington's grip are instead driving Ottawa to look elsewhere. With new demands on the table, the cycle may be about to repeat on an even larger scale. In reality, the sweeping tariff package introduced by Washington in early August has been costly at home and unpopular abroad. Instead of uniting allies, it has driven them away. Partners like Canada and the European Union feel punished rather than protected. Canada, in particular, has become the unexpected center of attention. Earlier this year, Ottawa imposed its own heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, proving that it could act decisively without waiting for Washington's lead. That bold step should have earned recognition. Instead, the United States treated Canada like just another target. No exemptions, no special treatment, just tariffs. Meanwhile, China has not stood still. Over the summer, Beijing deepened its cooperation with Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Then came a symbolic moment. India's participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit just 2 weeks ago. The event, held in Shenzhen, brought together leaders from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and India. For Beijing, it was a clear demonstration that the balance of power is shifting. For Washington, the hope was simple. Tariffs would isolate China and weaken its global reach. But the opposite has happened. Instead of being cornered, Beijing now has a larger platform and a wider circle of partners. The SCO has given China legitimacy and momentum. Far from being weakened, it has become more confident in pushing back. This was on full display during Donald Trump's disastrous summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. While the U.S. president stumbled on the diplomatic stage, India's Prime Minister Modi was shaking hands with China, Russia, and Iran. The image was unmistakable. a gathering of powers rallying together in defiance of Washington's pressure. Trump's tariff strategy hasn't curbed China. It has accelerated Beijing's urgency to build new alliances, leaving the United States scrambling to hold on to its own. And now, Trump is pressing Canada and NATO to carry the economic weight. The demands sound bold: tariffs of 50 to 100% on Chinese goods, coupled with a ban on Russian oil imports. But they reveal a deeper problem. For Europe, such a move would risk economic self-harm. China is one of its top export destinations, and any aggressive tariff wall would invite instant retaliation. For Canada, the situation is more nuanced. Ottawa has already shown it can act on its own terms, hitting Chinese EVs with tariffs earlier this year. That decision gives Canada leverage. If Trump truly wants Canada on board, Ottawa can set conditions. It can refuse to be dragged into a wider tariff war unless the U.S. treats it as a genuine equal. Canada is not a junior partner. It now holds the stronger hand, and it can say no, or at least insist on terms that protect its own national interests. All of this is unfolding against a backdrop of rising security threats. In early September, 19 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, forcing Warsaw to invoke NATO's Article 4. France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Denmark scrambled fighter jets to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank. But the United States remained largely absent, with Trump focusing instead on tariffs and trade demands. The contrast is stark. NATO is already engaged in defending its borders, yet Washington is asking allies to open a second front, this time in economic warfare against China. The result is division inside the alliance. Canada and Europe both face a dilemma, balancing their obligations to the United States against their exposure to Chinese retaliation. Beijing, meanwhile, benefits from every crack that appears in Western unity. What was supposed to be a strategy to isolate adversaries has turned into a source of tension with allies. Trump's gamble has backfired. Instead of strengthening America's hand, it has weakened trust inside NATO and forced Canada into a position where cooperation is no longer guaranteed. And then came the shock inside America itself. In early September, federal agents staged the largest workplace immigration raid in U.S. history at Hyundai's new electric vehicle battery plant in Georgia. Nearly 475 workers were detained, most of them South Korean nationals. The irony couldn't be greater. Hyundai's project was a direct response to U.S. tariffs. In 2022, the company announced a $7 billion investment in Georgia to build EVs and batteries inside the U.S., creating more than 8,000 American jobs. By Washington's logic, this should have been a success story. Instead, it became the target of the most aggressive immigration crackdown yet. Work at the plant was halted immediately. Subcontractors lost access, sensitive installation work was interrupted, and the supply chain was thrown into disarray. Construction analysts point out that in projects of this size, every month of delay adds between 0.5% and 1% to costs. On Hyundai's $4.3 billion battery facility, that equals between $21 million and $43 million per month. A 2-month delay alone could surpass $80 million. This is the hidden cost of Trump's policies. Strict enforcement may play well politically, but economically, it disrupts the very investments his tariffs were supposed to encourage. The EV supply chain is fragile, and pushing production from 2025 to 2026 would ripple through North America's transition to electric vehicles. The arrests also created diplomatic fallout. More than 300 South Korean nationals were among the detainees. Seoul responded with anger, chartering flights to bring its citizens home and dispatching its foreign minister to Washington. The message was sharp. This was humiliating treatment of a country that had just pledged hundreds of billions in new U.S. investments. For foreign investors, the raid sent shockwaves. For years, U.S. states like Georgia have competed fiercely to attract companies like Hyundai, Samsung, and Toyota, with tax incentives and promises of stability. Now those companies face a new reality. Even if they follow Washington's rules, they may still find themselves punished. Trump defended the raid as enforcement of U.S. law, insisting that foreign firms must train and employ American workers if they want access to the market. But the broader signal is hard to miss. Tariffs designed to pull investment into the U.S. are now clashing with policies that push it away. The consequence? Rising uncertainty, weaker trust among allies, and a global economy that is increasingly looking for alternatives. Canada, Europe, South Korea, each is learning the same lesson. If Washington treats partners as targets, they will seek new options. And once those options are built, America's leverage may never return. Hyundai alone had pledged a staggering $26 billion in investments through 2028, a commitment framed as part of Trump's larger tariff strategy. The message from Washington had been clear. If allies like South Korea wanted to avoid heavy tariffs, they should move production, capital, and jobs into America. And Hyundai did exactly that. But then came the raid, and with it, a shock that cut directly against the very logic of Trump's plan. Industry leaders in Seoul described the crackdown as a betrayal. Yes, they admitted, there were visa and paperwork issues. But they also pointed out something fundamental. U.S. rules make it nearly impossible to staff massive, highly technical projects without bringing in foreign specialists. These are the engineers, technicians, and installers who know how to set up the advanced equipment. Without them, timelines slip and costs soar. Trump's public defense of the raid summed up the contradiction at the heart of his second-term agenda. On one hand, he insisted that ICE was doing its job because many of those workers were in the U.S. illegally. On the other hand, he openly acknowledged that America still needs foreign experts to train domestic workers until they gain the skills to do it themselves. The problem is obvious. His policies are pulling in opposite directions. For South Korea, the signals from Washington are deeply confusing. On paper, Trump wants allies to move factories to the U.S., but in practice, his aggressive enforcement sweeps make those very factories harder to run. Each month of disruption at Hyundai's $4.3 billion battery facility costs between $21 and $43 million, with delays pushing back EV production until 2026. That's not just a financial hit. It sends tremors across the entire North American electric vehicle supply chain. Layered on top of this is Trump's own skepticism toward EVs. He has mocked electric cars repeatedly, even as he demands that allies build EV plants on U.S. soil. For foreign investors, the message is muddled and costly. Are they entering a secure market, or one defined by constant risk and political contradiction? The images of hundreds of South Korean workers led away in handcuffs were broadcast worldwide. In Seoul, the government scrambled to arrange charter flights home for over 300 of its citizens. Officials described the incident as humiliating, especially given that South Korea had just promised hundreds of billions of dollars in fresh U.S. investments. And that is why the Hyundai raid is more than just another immigration story. It is a case study in how Trump's two signature policies, tariffs and hardline enforcement, are colliding. Tariffs push companies to America, but raids chase them away. What is left is not certainty or growth, but a cloud of doubt. The very strategy meant to showcase Made in USA strength risks undermining itself before it even takes hold. The consequence? Rising uncertainty, weaker trust among allies, and a global economy that is increasingly looking for alternatives. Canada, Europe, South Korea, each is learning the same lesson. If Washington treats partners as targets, they will seek new options. And once those options are built, America's leverage may never return. Hyundai alone had pledged a staggering $26 billion in investments through 2028, a commitment framed as part of Trump's larger tariff strategy. The message from Washington had been clear. If allies like South Korea wanted to avoid heavy tariffs, they should move production, capital, and jobs into America. And Hyundai did exactly that. But then came the raid, and with it, a shock that cut directly against the very logic of Trump's plan. Industry leaders in Seoul described the crackdown as a betrayal. Yes, they admitted there were visa and paperwork issues, but they also pointed out something fundamental. U.S. rules make it nearly impossible to staff massive, highly technical projects without bringing in foreign specialists. These are the engineers, technicians, and installers who know how to set up the advanced equipment. Without them, timelines slip and costs soar. Trump's public defense of the raid summed up the contradiction at the heart of his second-term agenda. On one hand, he insisted that ICE was doing its job because many of those workers were in the U.S. illegally. On the other hand, he openly acknowledged that America still needs foreign experts to train domestic workers until they gain the skills to do it themselves. The problem is obvious. His policies are pulling in opposite directions. For South Korea, the signals from Washington are deeply confusing. On paper, Trump wants allies to move factories to the U.S., but in practice, his aggressive enforcement sweeps make those very factories harder to run. Each month of disruption at Hyundai's $4.3 billion battery facility costs between $21 and $43 million, with delays pushing back EV production until 2026. That's not just a financial hit. It sends tremors across the entire North American electric vehicle supply chain. Layered on top of this is Trump's own skepticism toward EVs. He has mocked electric cars repeatedly, even as he demands that allies build EV plants on U.S. soil. For foreign investors, the message is muddled and costly. Are they entering a secure market or one defined by constant risk and political contradiction? The images of hundreds of South Korean workers led away in handcuffs were broadcast worldwide. In Seoul, the government scrambled to arrange charter flights home for over 300 of its citizens. Officials described the incident as humiliating, especially given that South Korea had just promised hundreds of billions of dollars in fresh U.S. investments. And that is why the Hyundai raid is more than just another immigration story. It is a case study in how Trump's two signature policies, tariffs and hardline enforcement, are colliding. Tariffs push companies to America, but raids chase them away. What is left is not certainty or growth, but a cloud of doubt. The very strategy meant to showcase made in USA strength risks, undermining itself before it even takes hold.